Hi, this is Anthony Parent of IRS Medic, and last week there was a report out by Senator Ron Wyden, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. His report, Credit Suisse's role in U.S. tax evasion schemes, a Democratic staff investigation of March 29th, 2023. This is what happened: is that we read that report, John, Keith, and I. We've read that report, and we were so outraged. Our passion really took center stage in our show last week. So we wanted to spend a little bit more time going over the meats and potatoes of exactly what this report is, and showing you step by step the dangers of what's exactly going on. So joining me today are Keith Redmond, global advocate for the American overseas. Good morning to you, Keith.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. Nice to hear you from here. And also along with John Richardson. And John just wrote a very nice article that we have a link to, sort of discussing this and going step by step, exactly what's going on. Hello. Good morning to you. Good morning to you, John. You ready to go?
We are ready.
All right, great. Well, we're going to start off. And so I'm going to pull up a slide here. We got a little slides, and this is from John's article. He just wrote it to sort of articulate it. And so, the first thing I want to get to is this, John, this quote right here, that this is probably, I think we all highlighted the same exact quote. We saw that, like, what is this? I'll read it, and then maybe you can explain where the highest outrage comes from. And it starts off with this. It starts with a dual citizenship affords unique opportunities for cross-border tax evasion. A trend in the concealment of offshore bank accounts involves bankers hiding accounts for ultra high net worth U.S. citizens who have dual citizenship by coding bank accounts using only their non-U.S. passport and foreign residences. A complicit banker is able to code accounts in a manner that would evade any internal systems designed to identify Americans and comply with U.S. law. This behavior was observed in Credit Suisse's handling of large undeclared accounts held by Horsky, somebody who was alleged to do something wrong at some point, and the U.S. Latin American family, just some vague family, by the way, that Senator Wyden invents, or maybe there is some. So, John, where would we start with this sort of monstrosity, or where would you start?
Well, I would start with something that is not articulated in it at all, but is a very, very clear assumption. And I think that this is important I understand that there's people watching this or who will watch it who, may be supporters of Wyden and the Democrats and this sort of thing. But I think that the starting point on this is that this absolutely assumes the propriety, the reasonableness, and the continuation of citizenship taxation, because citizenship is relevant only in the United States. I mean, can you imagine, Wyden and company going around the world and talking to all these bankers in other countries and saying, it's our citizens that we need you to be. It's our citizens. They owe us because they're citizens, right? Not because they're resident. All right. What's extraordinary about this is there's absolutely no, connecting residents to this at all. Although it does say they're non and foreign residents. It's not okay. The passport is irrelevant to the residents, but they keep focusing. Their focus is always on the citizenship. It is not the fact of dual citizenship at all that is the issue here. It is the residents, perhaps in another country, the tax residents, that should be the issue here. But the first point is that this assumes, the righteousness of citizenship taxation. The second point I would make is, this is so outrageously false and ridiculous. Even for this committee, it's outrageously false and ridiculous, because this is just simply about an internal Credit Suisse mechanism that appears to allow the use of a foreign passport or non-U.S. passport as a proxy for non-U.S. residents. And everybody knows that's absolutely preposterous, because a passport has a place of birth on it, which in most cases would indicate a U.S. birthplace and therefore U.S. citizenship. So it is, in fact, this is an absolutely outrageously false and ignorant statement from this committee, outrageously false and ignorant. And yes, I'm trying to remain calm. Okay. Because it's not the citizenship, it's the residence. And in any case, even if it were citizenship, okay, it's clear these people are U.S. citizens. So then what he does is he's going on here, and this is why this is a big problem for Americans abroad. This guy is outrageously demonizing people with dual citizenship. Now, does this guy not understand? Okay, I'm sure he doesn't. But first of all, citizenship is a constitutional right from the 14th Amendment. Number one. And it is not something that people select to evade U.S. taxes. All right, that's what he thinks. Okay, he obviously thinks. Wyden obviously thinks that being born in the United States and getting U.S. citizenship must be an indicator of tax evasion or something like this.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But, the point is that not only is it conferred on birth in the United States, but the Supreme Court of the United States in 67 and 1980 specifically ruled that Americans have a constitutional right to dual citizenship. Okay? So, you can look at this upside down, sideways, and diagonally. It is an outrageously ignorant statement demonizing dual citizens. Now, the good thing that comes from this is that as per rolling out lawsuits, this is proof positive of such, deliberate discrimination and hatred of dual citizenship that it might be used, arguably, to make the case that these citizenship classifications are subject to strict scrutiny.
This is just getting so much. It's and this is when I was reading this, it said a complicit banker is able to code accounts in America that would evade internal systems designed to identify Americans and comply with U.S. law. You know what? You don't need you actually don't need a dual citizen in order to do that. You could just do that. You don't, if a complicit banker wants to help you evade taxes, guess what they can do? They can help you evade taxes. That's what they could do. So the idea that, you have a dual citizenship and now the opportunity is really there. There's a big opportunity there that didn't exist otherwise. And I think that's where you sort of get to this outrage. I want to move to the next point.
Before you move on, just one other sort of anecdotal point on this. And you may want to link this to an article I wrote in around 2018.
Okay.
As you may know, I have an interest in any case in these citizenship by investment programs, but the OECD made exactly the same allegation in 2018 with respect to citizenship by investment programs, that somehow, the proliferation of these programs could be somehow linked to tax evasion, right? Again, making the allegation that just the second citizenship alone was an indicator of tax evasion. So, Wyden's got some company there.
They're not alone. And that's sort of the obnoxious. No, it's just people who want to live a life. They just want to live their life. The top thing on their mind isn't what the demands of Senator Wyden are. They're just thinking of their life and their things. But Senator Wyden wants to be, inserting himself into everyone's life. So much so lovely.
So here's my question, gentlemen. So here's my question to you, and just your thoughts based on what you were saying, John. So let's say you're a dual citizen, okay, and you are. I'll just use French. You have a French birthplace and you have a French passport, but you also are a U.S. citizen. Based on what Wyden is saying, there's really no incentive to divulge your U.S. citizenship because it's going to ruin you. Do you see what I mean? It's just this attitude that permeates Congress, and he just happens to be the one at the forefront right at the moment. It doesn't really give any incentive for anybody to divulge their U.S. citizenship. You kind of follow what I'm saying? So I don't know what he's trying to accomplish.
Don't you mean it provides incentives to hide U.S. citizenship as opposed to? Isn't that what you're saying?
Yeah, not disclose it.
Well, I would say so because these bankers have to be worried because we have Senator Wyden, say, hey, look, these bankers love dual citizens. You know why? Because they love to be complicit, as if the bankers really have some large, motivation to evade taxes. Hey, look, it's people get pinched for that all the time. I don't really see why someone who's doing well in life would go that far. And sure, it happens, but it's the exception. And what Senator Wyden's doing is treating the rare, like, oh, there was one case around the world. In
Right.
7 billion people, there's one case of here. So therefore, we should impose more punitive taxation, more difficulties. We should be more aggressive, and taxpayers need to be more transparent to us. I want to move on to our next slide, and this is something that is it's hidden, and then this is the hidden argument. And I'm going to hand it over to John. This is the big issue is the report does not describe the alleged tax evaders as U.S. tax residents or U.S. residents. Rather, the report describes them as U.S. citizens. And this is what the trouble. John, why don't you explain the trouble with this is?
Well, it really comes back, I think, to what I said a moment ago, that the whole thing assumes that, the way of the world should be citizenship taxation. And that residence is really not relevant, okay? That citizenship determines tax residency. Residence is not the issue. And this reminds me very much of the Justice Barrett's dissent in the Bittner F-Bar case, where, if you look at Gorsuch's majority opinion, right in the first paragraph, he notes that, well, okay, in the universe of people impacted by this, we have people who don't live in the United States, Americans abroad. We have immigrants, people who did not live in the United States, and he uses that at least as part of his sort of structural foundation for the decision. Barrett, on the other hand, in the first paragraph says these are U.S. citizens. That's it. No further discussion. These are U.S. citizens. Okay, no further discussion. This is what Wyden is doing. These are U.S. citizens. No emphasis on residence whatsoever. Okay. Now, that in itself should be deeply troubling, even to the rank and file card-carrying Democrats who are listening to this. This should be deeply troubling because what he's really assuming is that, unfortunately, there's no other way to put this, is that citizenship is what matters, and it essentially is a tie to the United States that allows the United States to regulate every aspect of their life simply because. Now, many people may think that's okay. I don't think that's what citizenship is about at all, but, perhaps I'm wrong. On another level, though, it's very, very interesting that, the report is one more example of how Americans abroad are victimized and demonized by rules that are, one, sufficiently broad to include all citizens, but are unlikely to have been intended to apply to them. Now, this is what I mean by this is that, so Wyden's getting ready, he's just foaming at the mouth, getting ready, to try to justify ramping something else up here, quite obviously. But this discussion, first of all, it's completely idiotic. He's got only 2 examples going back 10 years ago. It's ridiculous. I don't even know why he's doing this, but okay. But it reminds me very much, I think that if anybody who's interested in this might go back and watch the videos of the 1996 deliberations leading up to the present 877A exit tax, where it's exactly the same thing. They focused on 2 or 3 wealthy Americans who expatriated. And then all of a sudden these rules come in that, make it, very difficult for, American citizens of modest means to expatriate. So we see that. Another interesting example, and I'd recommend a book by David K. Johnston, who some of you may know as a fairly well-known U.S. journalist. A book he wrote about the U.S. tax system in 2003, and I'd refer you specifically to a chapter about the alternative minimum tax, which started in exactly the same way. There were 246 taxpayers in 1969 who didn't pay U.S. tax. And this comes again from the Democrats. The Democrats started foaming at the mouth. The alternative minimum tax was created. And now it's a huge problem. It's one more class tax, which has worked its way down to becoming a mass tax. And this is exactly what has happened. U.S. citizens abroad are victims.
And this is what I would say is that while we focus on citizens abroad, I live in the great state of Connecticut, and I see what's happening. Everything that they do overseas, they bring into the U.S. and they start the overseas taxation is the trial balloon. It's the trial balloon of what can we get away with. Okay, good. Now we're going to bring all that crap to the U.S. And so, I am not. I don't have a lot of things overseas, but I am concerned about this. Well, number one, because it affects my clients greatly, but also everything they're doing, they're laying the groundwork for the FATCA that's coming into the U.S. So wild penalties for simply not disclosing things that may not have any tax consequences. There's no legitimate reason for the government to know this. That's the right. There's no privacy. And we'll move on to our next slide.
Now, just one other point on this one, though, before we move on, that I think is very important, and this is prompted by your comment about looking to Americans abroad as the trial balloon. If you were to look at the 2023 and 2024 Biden budget proposals, these things that many resident Americans are finding completely outrageous are actually based on rules that already do apply to Americans abroad. And that might be a useful podcast that we're
going to be discussing. Yeah, I've been going through. So yeah, we're going to have some upcoming podcasts to go over that. The budget's out and the plan's out, and there's a lot of confusion about what's going on. So we're going to be dissecting that a lot.
Your point is a good one. That all, as I've said on Twitter, all resident Americans need to do to see their future is look at how the U.S. treats citizens abroad. That's all they have to do.
Exactly. That's the point we need to make clear with everybody. That's why every American should be concerned about what's happening. Unfortunately, the IRS's pain is aimed at the 6-7 million people overseas, and also those in the U.S. who have retirement accounts, especially if you happen to be retired, especially if you happen to inherit an account. I am dealing right now with our friends at Large Business and International on a case right here, and they're doing exactly some of the most horrific things in the world, and there's really not much you can do. Once you are, it might be too late once they get you. So that's why you want to really be on top of this. And it's sort of like, let's see what we could do to unite and change the law. That's really what we need to do. Keith, here's the question I have for you on this. Do you see, this is really, and I would say, Keith, this is probably the number one complaint of the people you talk to. Hey, we have these bank accounts in the country we're living in. And yes, I have a bank account with many millions of dollars, maybe something else, but hey, look, it's all US dollars because we're the global reserve concern with millions in the bank account. But you know why I do that? Because I have a business and I need to pay for things and I need to take money in.
Right.
What would you say?
Exactly.
Yeah. Is that what you're hearing from your people?
Well, I do hear that from people, from Americans overseas who just don't understand what is going on here. They're not doing anything wrong. And that's where, I have a hard time. They have a hard time with this vitriol that comes out from somebody. And it just happens to be Wyden right now. Okay. Yeah. It could be anybody. White House did it last year or something else.
They all have this.
It just boggles the mind. Yeah. And like I said, I kind of reposted an article that I wrote back in 2014 with CNBC. And, I started out stating that, there's this unusual American phenomena that if you're American and you're living outside the United States for whatever reason, you must be committing some type of nefarious activity. And that is the ambiance that permeates.
It is the lockstep.
Everything.
Yeah, it's the lockstep, kind of, phony crisis. Right. He's creating a phony crisis. There is no crisis whatsoever. Well, the crisis is we're not controlling Americans enough. That seems to be the crisis. I want to move on to the next slide. This is what I think is the point that we're getting to when we have a comment We have a great comment from Sansei Joe, really kind of, I think articulating this. It's like Sansei Joe just commented, slavery was never abolished. It was changed to tax slavery based on citizenship. And then, John, when I was reading this slide, this point of your article that you wrote, the report uses language that suggests that U.S. government has a property interest in U.S. citizens. And I would really, I agree with you. The thing I thought about was really, the Dred Scott decision. Like, well, look, you could go where you want, but you're still owned, man. You are still owned. You could go to Mars and you're still owned by the U.S. government. And anything to add to that, John?
Well, if you look at the language in the report, they talk about citizens, but they also, clearly use the language U.S. persons. That actually is a definition, right? There's a definition of U.S. person, and that's section of the Internal Revenue Code. It's an extremely, derogatory definition. I agree, right along with words like alien and stuff like that. I mean, it really just comes from another era. But I think that with or without the language, U.S. person, there is absolutely no question that, that citizenship, from the point of view of the U.S. government, the fact of U.S. citizenship is a sufficient condition for the government to have the right to control every aspect of your life. Okay, I mean, I think that that's a very neutral statement. Now, I've seen these suggestions of the word slavery. I'm going to part company, as offensive as I find this, I'm going to part company with the people who use the word slave or slavery. I don't think that U.S. citizenship is a form of slavery. But I do think that to be a U.S. citizen is to be a prisoner of the assumption that the United States has the right to control every aspect of your lives. So not slavery, prisoner, yes. Okay.
Okay, I would call that slavery, but I love your definition. I love it because I think it's a hair away from slavery. I think you go.
Well,
right
I think that,
I'm going to go higher, but I'm not going to. It's so close.
Well, I was thinking about this, and the question becomes. I think it's very, very difficult unless you disagree with the assumption that U.S. citizenship is a sufficient condition for the government to control every aspect of your life. Perhaps you disagree with that assumption. I do not disagree with it. I think that's exactly what it is.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
In the tax code, I think the question becomes, what would be the triggering factor for being a prisoner to, transition into something more significant. And you look at the expatriation rules, right? At the present time, there is at the very least a statutory right to expatriate in Section 349A of the Immigration Nationality Act. There's some disagreement over whether there's a constitutional right for U.S. citizens to expatriate. Okay, there's some disagreement over that. It seems to me, though, that if it were determined that there is no constitutional right to expatriate, in other words, no way to jettison your U.S. citizenship, then that conceivably might be the trigger to move the status of prisoner perhaps to something more extreme. I don't know.
I did love your definition there. I think that's where, it's like, hey, look, you're a U.S. person. So wherever you're going in the world, we have something in that. When you make $1, anywhere in the universe, actually, the IRS has a silent lien on that dollar. The second.
Well, Anthony, that's true. You're looking at it from the point of view of the individual, but since we're so deep into this already, let me just make a point about the FATCA IGAs. Okay, and Chapter 4 of the Internal Revenue Code 1471-1474, which is the legislative basis for FATCA and the IGAs. is they constantly refer to these accounts as U.S. accounts, U.S. accounts, U.S. accounts, not accounts owned by, U.S. accounts. These are ours.
Right. Yeah.
They're ours. And, again, what's the basis for there being ours, our U.S. accounts? Well, is because they're held by U.S. citizens primarily, right? Or residents, what have you. And, they can say, well, that's not what we meant. But the thing is, that's exactly the language.
What you wrote, yeah.
That is what they mean.
And that's what they mean. No, that is what they mean.
Telegraphing to the world that, these accounts really belong to the U.S. government. And, and we want you to help us find our accounts.
That's exactly right. We're going to move to the next slide here. This is sort of where because the thing is, this statement had so much overload of outrage. It was sort of hard to say, okay, how do we get our outrage out and sort of articulate it? Because one of the things inherent in it is this sort of implicit assumption that our bizarre and completely outlandish, totally unique taxing regime of the United States of America, which is just one country in the world, that has this one thing. We are the weirdos by far, but this report just assumes, well, we're the United States of America, so hey, we're exceptional. Therefore, this is totally okay. The report doesn't mention the fact anything other than saying, it doesn't mention saying, oh, you know what? There might be some reasonableness to people not quite understanding this because many U.S. dual citizens were born in other countries, later became U.S. citizens, and weren't versed, even though many Americans don't understand this stuff, they just don't affect it till they go overseas or have something overseas. And so, and by the way, we have a lot of people joining us live here. So we are on the Senator Wyden's report. John created John wrote an article. We have a link to that where we discuss the other bullet points above. If you want to check that out. Thank you everyone for joining us, and feel free to comment. I am seeing them live. So feel free to add your 2 cents in here. We want to make sure everyone feels like they're involved. So on this slide right here, there is nothing that indicates that someone overseas has a legitimate reason for not quite understanding this. And is that your outrage on this, or is it a little bit different?
Is that question directed to me?
That question is for you, John.
Well, for me, the problem I have with this whole thing is that my outrage over this report is so much greater than the outrage over the individual parts. That it's the whole is way greater than the sum of the parts. That it's hard to break this down. But interestingly, I've discussed this not at great length, but with a number of people, and the number of times I've had the question, were the members did they live in the United States, right? That's not even really clear from the report. So this thing is very, very clearly and foundationally based on the citizenship of the people involved, okay, and not the residents. And the first point, as I started off with today, the fundamental, and the reason this is so horrific generally, but for Americans abroad specifically, is because what this really is the whole report almost is based on a foundation of citizenship taxation, right? And the righteousness and the propriety of citizenship taxation. And citizenship taxation is taxation based mostly on the circumstances of birth. Imagine you're born in the USA, so you're a prisoner of the U.S. tax system for life. That's it. Okay, not based on circumstances of birth, of life, right? So this is, I think, perhaps from my point of view, the single biggest problem with this report is that it's a backhanded endorsement of citizenship taxation, and that the whole report assumes citizenship taxation.
And it's, you know, and if you think about it, citizenship-based taxation is really contrived, quite contrived. It's hasn't any relationship unless, you know, I have a theory, of course, about what this is all about. We won't go that too much right now. So we're looking at things on, you know, we're looking at the things on the surface level. We don't want to go too deep. I think there's reasons for all of this. And I think a lot of the reasons have to do with the U.S. Dollar being the world reserve currency. I think that has a lot to do with it. We're not going to get into that right now. But the assumption here is a little obnoxious. Keith, anything to add on this?
No, you guys said it all. That's why I've been silent, because you guys
Yeah.
are hitting it right on the nail on the head. I mean, I just shake my head sometimes on how things have not changed with this attitude toward dual nationals, Americans overseas, this whole thing about citizenship. I just don't understand it. I really don't.
Yeah,
But
it's
it
a
is
little
what it is at the moment. But it's kind of scary, you know, just that we're still dealing with it in 2023. And there's not as much outrage about it from people who should, and entities who should be outraged about it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right. Well, yeah, that's absolutely true. You know, it's funny. You know, the people who you know are pretty quiet about this. And this is I think this. You know, when I didn't realize you did this, John. And I didn't realize that the seat did it. That you did this, but so this is pretty nuts. What happened here? So the Senate Finance Committee, in starting March of 2021, under the leadership of Senator Wyden, began a series of hearings about various aspects of U.S. tax policy. See, along with many individual Americans abroad, filed a number of submissions with the Senate Finance Committee. These submissions included a request that representatives from Americans abroad be given the opportunity to discuss their concerns. Oh, what happened there, John Richardson? What happened? Were your concerns addressed?
Well, you know, I think, okay, it's very, very clear that with respect to Americans abroad, as I've said a million times, it's not that they don't care, it's that they don't care that they don't care. But the real point here is this. It's one thing to say, well, they don't care about Americans abroad, but what people need to understand is they don't care about any individual citizen.
Yeah.
Okay, absolutely none at all. And, you know, you look at the whole American political process from outside, right? And, you know, it's fascinating, you know, as I watch the whole, you know, business with Trump and that, and the, you know, the criminal charges and whatever these things are, et cetera. And, you know, you wonder how this can be going on. And the reason that it goes on is because, you know, President Trump has become the vehicle through which American citizens, whether inside or outside the United States, express their outrage that their elected representatives don't care about them at all. I mean, that is why, you know, that is why, okay, this is going on. And it's an amazing thing to me. It's an amazing thing. I mean, you know, I've often wondered, you know, rather than going around demonizing President Trump as the Democrats do all the time, wouldn't it make more sense for them to just pay attention to the individual voters and try to represent them?
Well, there you go. And I think that's where we, you know, and that's really one of my outrages on this myself, is that who is the constituency? Who is the constituency that is driving this, right? If we are supposed to be a representative constitutional republic, our representatives are supposed to take, oh, here are the interests of our constituencies. Let's create a law. Let's go do this. Let's go do this. And I'm still trying to find somebody. And I think there might be some, you know, I'm trying to find somebody, and I would love to find someone who isn't employed by the government.
Yeah, Anthony.
And not either directly nor indirectly. If you're employed by the government, unfortunately, your opinion doesn't count.
Yeah.
But it seems like the government's opinion, what they want, well, somebody at the IRS is upset about this. Who cares? What do the people want? A senator's upset. Who cares?
Things in the press release, and this is, we haven't even discussed this, but this is absolutely mind-boggling. Okay.
Yeah.
So they
No,
put together
Yeah,
this
I think we lost. I think Keith had to drop out. So let's finish up on this here, and this is here. So here's where we are right now. Right, the Wyden report assumes and reinforces the reasonableness of citizenship taxation, which, by the way, in there, it's not just citizenship taxation, but when we look at the Bank Secrecy Act of 1970, the FBAR, right? That's not a tax document, so it's citizenship reporting as well. That because your FBAR doesn't have to do with taxes, yet you better do it or else. So it's beyond just citizenship taxation. It's we're going to rule over everything, no matter where you are. And now, Keith has joined us back here. Yeah, I think he dropped out. Great to have you back, Keith. And Keith, here's the question. We're
bad connection.
So this is where I want to ask you. So, Americans abroad, AARO, are they fans
Arrow?
Yeah, Arrow. They're not. They don't seem to be so happy with this.
No, they're not happy with it. Seat is not happy with it. Individual Americans overseas are not happy with that. And there are other organizations who have been conspicuously silent on that particular aspect of what Wyden spoke about regarding dual nationals.
Yeah.
That's a fact. And it makes me question, okay, you're an American overseas organization and you have someone, in Congress who is saying something not very pleasant, not very accurate about dual nationals, yet you remain silent. For me, it's like, what did Maya Angelou say? When somebody shows who they are, believe them. It just is quite evident that, to me, they don't care.
And that's
my opinion.
Right. And they don't care that they are. That's exactly right. This is just it's really going beyond. And this is something, and this is something, and I can't remember who said it. I think it was Rand Paul who said it at the here in 2017. It was something like government transparency means the government is supposed to be transparent to us, not that we are transparent to the government. And these are the questions I think everybody should be asking instead of just accepting these reports. It's like, oh wow, what a scary thing is. Who's behind this report? Who's really behind this report? I can tell you, I think we all could probably agree that Senator Wyden wouldn't know the first thing about, complying with U.S. taxes. I don't think he would understand the basics, how a Form 1116 works. I wouldn't understand him to understand the nuances whatsoever. He's
right. Yeah.
So who's really behind this? That's the question
you raise a good question, and here's a question for both of you on this one. Tell me what you think. This is a report. Senator Wyden said what he did. The ranking person, who's a Republican, does that mean that he or she agrees with this report? Or this is where I don't understand the politics, and that's just my naivete. What did the ranking Republican say on this?
I don't think we've gotten a comment there, which is sort of, that's also the other thing too, as someone who's no longer believing that there's one side that has our interests. I don't believe that. I believe both work in conjunction, and Republicans often just fundraise off a Democrat agitation.
Yeah,
I claim they're going to see today, but miraculously, when it comes down to it, man, you can find that bipartisanship comes right into play when it comes down to hose Americans. They both know how to come together. At fundraising times, there's a difference. But at other times, oh boy, they're best friends, and my colleague across the aisle, they can't wait to see each other at the cocktail parties and sort of laugh about it. So I think that's the thing. Who's behind it?
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe John has a different take on it. I think he does, but that's just my view.
It's a different take, but I think what's important here, as you read the press release, you ask, like, what in the world is the purpose of this thing anyway? I mean, it's so strange and ridiculous. But the final sentence in one of the paragraphs says, finally, the cases detailed in this investigation are textbooks examples of why Democrats gave the IRS new funding for the enforcement. Okay, then Republican budget cuts have decimated the IRS's ability to root out this kind of offshore tax evasion scheme, but Democrats are committed to stepping up enforcement against wealthy tax cheats. Oh my God.
Class war.
Right.
How's that working out?
Right. Yeah.
Not only does Wyden
And for those fans of this type of class warfare, let me just sort of explain how it works. Okay, the law is the thing used by the powerful to become more powerful. So all these things, and oh yeah, let's give the IRS the power to go after that bad guy, go after that bad guy. Well, let me tell you, bad guys have a lot of attorneys on there, and they structure things that make it pretty impossible for the IRS to go after them without exhausting their resources. So, and the hyper wealthy know how to use the code, and they also know that the U.S. is the best tax haven in the world to avoid all this. So the only people who can be hurt by all of these things are those who don't have the protection of a large advisory council to help them, and also donations also help.
Right.
Honestly, political
and let me,
really can help you get a little bit more justice than maybe your neighbor.
right. And I'd like to add something to that, Anthony, just to say, with what John read about, anytime you hear offshore, it's not about Americans living in the United States having accounts outside the United States. It's about Americans overseas having their local bank accounts in the country in which they live, which is normal. That's all under the umbrella of that evil offshore term. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's all together. So you, Mr. or Mrs. American overseas, you have an bad offshore bank account where you live.
Absolutely. Keith, I could hear those birds chirping in the background. We do have a beautiful spring morning here, don't we? Well, that's
I was adding some ambiance.
Yeah, that's a letter. I want to thank you both. And John, I really want to thank you for writing our article and articulating it. I have the link to Citizenship solutions.ca. People can go find that and read a little bit more about you. So this is an ongoing situation, folks. We are going to monitor this and get some updates, and I would really love to see the Republican reaction from this. Not that it wouldn't be much more than window dressing, because, again, Republicans and Democrats alike do benefit from this aggressive taxation. It all gives them power that allows them to dole out these political favors to their donors. So I would at least like to, and maybe Rand Paul would care to comment on this. He was helpful in at least getting some attention to FATCA. He was really the only big name at all concerned about this. That would be nice if he could sort of comment on this and get to the bottom. And I think answer some of these questions. Who is behind this? What is their goal? And why are Americans' concerns ignored? They're ignored. They were looking for feedback and totally ignored, stiff arm, like, yeah, that doesn't matter. We have the real thing over here, whoever our staffers. Our staffers are going to tell you your concerns. And the question is, how do we stop them? Now, one thing I could think to how to stop them, because this is something that John and Keith and we talk, what do we do? What do we do about this? And I'm convinced what we need to do is in order to change politics, we have to change culture. In order to change the culture, we need to educate our fellow man about what's going on. The problem is, this is taxation, and this is the way no one ever wants to talk about taxes. So it's really up to us to try to, insert this and try to come up with ways to insert these outrages into conversations that you're having with your friends, to say, you understand what this is doing, you understand what these penalties are, and challenge that. And I think that is the best thing we could do. John, final thoughts for today?
This is perhaps one of the top 2 or 3 most disturbing things I've yet seen from these people, because of the assumptions, the twin assumptions that it suggests. One, citizenship taxation, into citizenship being a sufficient indicator to control the life of the individual. I would add to this, okay, that maybe the key is you look at the first letter of the surname of these people. Wyden begins with W. Whitehouse begins with W. Warren begins with W. These are all people who are very much committed to citizenship taxation and continuing precisely the assumptions upon which this extremely offensive report are based. I also think that the time has come for these various organizations of Americans abroad I really think they need to take a position on this. Okay, particularly Democrats abroad. They claim to be, somehow at least they acknowledge that there are Americans abroad, if there's Democrats abroad, and this is so deeply offensive to the liberty, lives, or actually, how about to quote the Constitution, the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness of those Americans abroad. And I think it's time for the Democratic Party to make a decision, whether they actually believe in that or not.
Keith, I think Keith, we're going to end it with you, Keith. Do you think, Keith, you could reach out to these to some of these organizations to try to get some comment from them, and maybe we could discuss that. And if they would like to be on the show, we'd love to have their opinion as well. Keith, would you enjoy doing that? Could you do that for us?
I will try, at least, reaching out to the members of these organizations to have them push back on them to say, why are you being silent? I will do my best. Yeah,
and I think why did Senator Wyden ignore the feedback and go with a totally different sort of set of facts than what was actually given to him? And it'd be wonderful. All right. Well, I want to thank all our viewers today, everyone for joining us today. Fantastic podcast. Any ideas? Any suggestions that you have for content? Please let us know. And if you have, and I would say this, if you are a banker overseas, and I would love to get you on the show, and just sort of get your, if you're someone who's running a bank overseas and you're dealing with U.S. non-U.S. citizens, I'd love to get you on the show and get your experience of what it's like to deal, with U.S. persons and sort of the scare tactics that come from Senator Wyden as well. With that, this is Anthony Parent of IRS Medic for John Richardson and Keith Redmond. Thank you for watching.